Excellent, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, and I thought since Chris invited Melissa, and I welcome you as well, Melissa, but I thought Chris would like to introduce you as our speaker today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Okay, and I have a different introduction to
Oh,
Melissa.
that's fine.
Yes, Melissa Radcliff has been with our children's place of Coastal Horizon, which is based in Wilmington since February of 2007. Our children's place is a statewide education and advocacy program focused on community support for children of the incarcerated and returning parents. Prior to that, she was the executive director and a founding staff member of the Family Violence Prevention and Victim Service Center of Orange County. And she worked with domestic violence, with rape crisis centers, and she's down in the gutter with people, and she helps them come out of that for sure. And she is now chair of the pre-release committee for Orange Correctional Center. And with that, Melissa, I think they've made you co-host if you have anything to share.
I do, most definitely. Thank you. And thanks, Chris, for the invitation. Thanks, Teresa, for getting it all set up. Thanks, Mary, who I think was my original contact with Richard. Is that true? So I feel like I know everybody here today, even though I haven't met most of you. So yeah, so I'm going to do share screen. I do have a fairly short PowerPoint, but I want to make sure folks have a chance to see it. So okay. So I'm happy to make this available to folks afterwards. If it's something you think you might be interested in, I can send it to folks individually. I can send it to one to forward to the group, but it's definitely a resource. If you're interested, just let me know about that. And I feel like I usually introduce myself, but Chris gave you that introduction, so I feel like I don't need to do that. If you have any questions, let me know. Like she said, I've been with our children's place. It'll be 15 years in February. And I'm starting to feel like grown-ups have the same job for 15 years, right? So that may be that I'm thinking about becoming an adult, right? That you have the same job and same employer for 15 years. So a bit of a reality check for me there. What I give to every group, and it doesn't matter what profession you work in, if you're paid, if you're a volunteer, if you're retired, I always give folks a homework sheet. And if we were together in person, as Chris knows, I would hand this out to you. Obviously, we can't do that here today, so I'm going to ask you to just grab a piece of paper and think about, hopefully you're going to get some good information here today, but what can you do with that information? Great, for me, great information is only as great as where it goes from this point. So having this, having these slides, having this conversation, looking at this is helpful, but is there something that you can do with it once you log off here this afternoon? And what you'll also see on a couple of different slides is a purple flower like you do on this one. And that's just kind of a visual reminder of, oh, that might be some homework that I could do. This is something I could do to continue this conversation. On this, what you'll see is that a part of your homework assignment is actually done for you. Hopefully nobody's on Facebook right now, but if you are later on, I posted yesterday that I would be here today. I post every time I'm going to talk to a group. I also put something on Twitter, but I also post if I hear and read some new research, if I hear of a new report, a new program, a new book. And I also post around what I call hallmark moments. So I'll be posting in a few weeks for Halloween. It's just a reminder to all of us that those days can look and feel different for children who have that incarcerated parent. So I think of it as an ongoing resource. So I encourage you to check it out, see if it's something you want to stay with us for a bit to see what we're doing, what we're focused on, what things are new and are happening out in the community. So that's your first homework assignment. So we're based here in Durham, and as you heard from Chris, we are part of Coastal Horizons, which is how a group in Durham got the words coastal and horizons in their name. People often say, you're not anywhere close to the coast and maybe the horizon, yeah, but that's how it works. So we're part of their justice services program, and we merged with them about 5.5 years ago. And our focus is just what Chris said, is community support for children who have an incarcerated and returning parent. And we were very deliberate a couple of years ago in saying and returning, because we want to make sure we're considering kids whose parents were arrested, who went to jail, maybe on to prison, and then are coming home. So thinking about this along that continuum, including the reentry piece, which is something we seem to be hearing a lot more about, is folks coming out of jail and prison. So what we say is, let's not forget about what that means for kids and families if their parent is being released and either coming back to their home or back to the community in general. So when I say that we're looking at community support, what we're saying is that we want to make sure that kids are recognized. So we move away from this thinking of, oh, well, I don't think I have any kids in my school, my subdivision, my community, my county. We don't have any of those children here. They must live somewhere else. Instead, moving more towards, we recognize that we all have children who have an incarcerated parent here in all of our communities. And sometimes this isn't where they started. So again, I'm here in Durham, and let's say I'm a little one whose mom went to jail, and now I'm staying with my grandmother who's in Wake County. Well, now Wake County has a child with an incarcerated parent. That's maybe not where I started, but to really get us to think about and recognize that we have children in all of our communities. So making sure they're recognized, making sure that they are supported rather than shamed and stigmatized. So what I think about is, how do we increase that support? How do we decrease that shame and stigma? Because the reality is, there is still shame and a stigma that's attached with having a loved one in prison. I think even more so when it's a parent. And I think sometimes what happens is, kids may or may not feel that shame and stigma, but they feel what other people are feeling, or they pick up on it, or they somehow think, well, I should feel ashamed because other people are telling me that's how I should feel. So they're supported, they're recognized, and they're encouraged to share their stories. The reality is, I am not an expert on children of incarcerated parents. The experts are the children of incarcerated parents. So thinking about, do we create opportunities for them to share their stories, tell us what's working, what's not working, what their relationship is like with their parent, what they wish was like, what they like and love about their parent, what do they find discouraging and they don't like about their parent today. So thinking about that and creating those opportunities. Towards the end, I'll talk about something that's happening in October, which is the See Us, Support Us campaign. But we're hoping to have one of those opportunities where we have a youth panel that kids can talk about, what they want the world to know about them in particular, but about in general, children who have that incarcerated and returning parent. So we spend a lot of time educating professionals. And I always joke that I want to be in front of professionals who work with kids and families. And what I say is, I'm not telling anyone how to do their job. Folks are doing amazing jobs, and they're doing it during a pandemic. What I want to make sure is not if, but when someone has a child in their classroom or after school program or Scouts troop or basketball team or anywhere they have a child, when they have that child with an incarcerated parent, do they have some resources, some tools, a place to turn, someone to talk to if they need some more information? So really thinking about expanding and adding to what professionals are already doing. We don't need to create a whole new program. We just want to make sure that professionals who are working with kids and families really have the tools and resources. And I think if there are any upsides to the pandemic, I think for us, one of the things that has allowed us to do is to go to that list that everybody has. Everybody has that list of, oh, someday I should be in touch with this person. And I don't know about you, but I never seem to get to that list. The pandemic has allowed me some flexibility to do that. And what I've realized is that we've been able to connect with folks that maybe we haven't in the past. I'll give you an example. About a month ago, I did a workshop for the Child Support Professionals and Attorneys Conference. Whoever knew they had a group, they do a conference. We had 90 child support professionals from across the state in our workshop. 90. I didn't even know there were 90 child support professionals in the state to start with, but 90. And the comments in the chat and the emails afterwards were consistent. What they all said is, we are not thinking about the kids. We're thinking about child support, but we're thinking about the support piece of it, but not the child piece of it. Are there things we could be doing more of, better, differently? So, really broadening our definition of professionals and how we're educating. The support relationships piece, which is the much smaller piece, but I think the one that catches people's attention, is one that has really suffered the consequences of being shut down. This is where we've been able to do programs in some of our prisons, actually in a jail for the first time about 2 years ago, where we go in and do Parent Day. So it's an extended visit. It's different than a regular visit. It's a whole different day. We bring in lunch and arts and crafts and a book display and a photographer, and kids get to spend that extended period of time with their parents. that shut down. The last time we did was October now of 2019. Nothing happened in 2020 because all of our jails and prisons were closed. They're slowly reopening with some restrictions. I was hopeful that we would resume things. At the very least, we'd get one parent day to happen by the end of this year, but I don't see that happening. I think their numbers are going up just like the community. And so some things need to be in better shape before we go in. But I'm hopeful that we are going to go in and be able to do some more of those parent days. And then the final piece of what we do, and actually I think this ties in a little bit to our Facebook posts, is looking at and constantly being on the lookout for what's working and what's not working, what's happening in other states that we could be doing in this state, what's happening in one particular part of the world that here in North Carolina that we could replicate somewhere else. So thinking about and identifying all the places where kids spend their lives and asking, is there something there? Social services, faith communities, schools, after school programs, childcare centers, all the places kids find themselves. Is there some support there for them? Because we just never know who kids turn to. We assume it's the social worker at the school, but the reality, it may be the bus driver, it may be a coach, it may be a cafeteria staff member, variety of things. So really thinking about all the places that kids find themselves, saying what's in place to support. And I think what ties into this and your work and your focus on social justice is any and all conversations that we're having about the justice system, whatever label we're giving it, what the justice system, are we thinking about the kids? So we think about things like bail and bond reform. That has an impact on kids, because if parents can't make bail and they're sitting in jail, they can't support their kids. We talk about mass incarceration, and we talk about restricted housing or segregation. It doesn't matter. All of segregated housing, all of those things have an impact on kids. So really saying, anytime we're talking about the justice system and we're talking about social justice and criminal justice, thinking about what does it mean for kids. So you thought I was kidding about the homework, but I'm actually not. And this is why I'm hoping you're going to ask for the PowerPoint, because I'd love for you to check out this very short video when we're done here today. I'd love your feedback. It's for me, the first time I saw it, and I've shared it with a million groups now, is I just think it's so amazing if we think about just what they're saying. If you think about a situation moving in one direction, but then put it in reverse and how it changes it completely. So that's your homework, or one of your homework assignments. And I'd love to know what you think about it. So questions we ask professionals all the time, and I always put these on a slide for professionals, and then I put them at the bottom of a couple of slides as reminders. So what do the kids need? What do we need to support them? Professionals, paid, volunteer, retired, what do they need to support them? And then what do the parents need? And I always point out that we're talking about the caregiving parent. So let's say the parent, and maybe it's not a parent, maybe it's grandparents, foster situation, whatever they're doing, what do they need to be able to support the kids? But also, what does the incarcerated parent need to support their children, which is something many of us aren't thinking about, right? We think about, we've locked away the bad people, we're done with them, but the reality is many of them are parents to start with, they're going to continue being parents. So we think about, what is it they need? Do they have access to a parenting class in jail or prison? Can they earn a GED if they don't have one? Do they have access to mental health and substance use disorder treatment? Those are the things that affect them as adults, but obviously they have a trickle-down effect for kids as well. So thinking about those questions, and we ask professionals to keep thinking about them throughout our workshop, and then also to take them back to their own setting to say, okay, what are we doing about those? What answers do we have to the questions? So I'm going to pause for just a second because it looks like we have a couple of questions. Oh, good. Thank you, Rod, for putting that in the chat about the video clip.
I haven't tried the link, Melissa, but hopefully I captured the number right. We'll see.
Okay, great. Okay, so anytime I speak to a group, I do one slide with statistics and just one. What I always say to folks is, if there's something that's not on here, you thought there was something I was going to cover, let me know. But I oftentimes find that if you offer too many statistics, too many numbers, people's eyes just start to glaze over and they don't take any of it in. So I'd rather people take in a little bit and build on it than to just tune out completely. So I'm going to talk nationally and then here in North Carolina. So nationally, we're talking about 2.7 million children. I don't know about you, but I don't know what 2.7 million looks like. I don't have 2.7 million of anything. Golf balls, teacups, postage stamps. I don't have it. So it's hard for me to visualize. But that number underneath is one that's very easy for me to think about. And that's 1 in 28, because I think of a classroom. So I think of either a classroom with kids in it where school's going back to in person, and I think there's one child out of 28 with an incarcerated parent, or I think of an empty classroom with 28 seats. And now I imagine if one seat was filled with a child with an incarcerated parent. But I always say to folks, and I didn't put the little purple flower, but this is another homework assignment to think about. I don't know if you're all here in Durham or elsewhere in the Triangle or elsewhere in the state, but what does that look like in your community? So if we know it's 1 in 28 nationally, like what does that look like for Durham Public Schools? What does that look like in Orange County or Chapel Hill Carborough? What does that look like in Wake County schools? To think about it from, okay, 1 in 28, but what does that look like in my community? And sometimes what folks say is, oh, that's helpful because I think about the fact that I volunteer at a school, or I help with a backpack program at a school, or I do something. And so now that I can think about what that means for my particular school. About 2 years ago, I did a workshop. This is when we were traveling. I did a workshop in Lincoln County and was at a mixed community group. And I gave that statistic. And then I looked down, and a guy probably 3 or 4 down from me, somebody I knew, he was head of student services for Lincoln County schools, was on his phone. And I got really annoyed that he wasn't even listening to me. He wasn't even pretending to listen to me. And I just got really annoyed. And then there was a pause, and he popped up and said, that works out to 972 students in Lincoln County. What he was doing is he was looking at the current census for the school and saying, this is what it looks like in our school. And then people paid attention. They said, oh, that's our community. Those are the kids that we know. Those are the kids our kids go to school with. So again, might be a homework assignment to think about what does 1 in 28 look like in your community. That little map of North Carolina with that almost 17,000 number, that comes about because the Department of Public Safety, so DPS, the folks who run our prisons here in North Carolina, they generate what they call their children's report. They do it annually for us. It's usually sometime late January, early February, and they've been doing it now for about 8 or 9 years. And what they do is it's essentially a point in time count. So they will run a report on that day, and they say, of the men and women who are sitting in our prisons, so not our jails, but our prisons here in North Carolina that day, how many of them have self-reported they have minor children? And that's where that almost 17,000 number comes from. Now, it's a self-reported number. So for any of you who've ever done any data collection, you know that self-report means you can self-report or you can self-not report, right? There's no consequence for reporting or not reporting. That question about whether or not you have children is asked during intake, which I think is probably a pretty stressful time. People are arriving in prison. They're being asked a series of questions about themselves, about their kids, their background. So for some folks, they're so overwhelmed, they can't even answer the question or any of the questions. Some will say, well, I'll tell you about myself, but I am not telling you about my kids. My kids aren't coming to prison. Others don't want to share about their children because they're afraid if they do, that somebody will call social services and their kids will be scooped up. And some have had a bad situation with DSS, so they're not looking to have that situation again. And then sometimes around issues involving child support, fathers won't answer that question. So I always say it's the best number we have, but it's not the best. The other thing is, and I mentioned this just a minute ago, is does not include kids whose parents are sitting in jail. So again, here in Durham, right? Let's say my dad's sitting downtown in the jail. I'm not going to be counted because he's not in prison, he's in jail. I'm also not counted if my dad is in a state prison in a different state. So let's say he's in a state prison in Texas. I'm not counted. And I'm also not counted if my parent is in a federal prison, regardless of which state. So let's say my mom is in the federal prison in Connecticut. I'm not counted. So again, the best number we have, but not the best. I mean, clearly there's some work to be done there about that data collection piece. And then again, another homework assignment, I put the link here to the Annie Casey Foundation, really good resources about kids in general, but the ones we always go to are the ones about having an incarcerated parent. And they look at how many kids have ever had an incarcerated parent. So not necessarily today, but at any point birth to 18. Those numbers, of course, skyrocket. It's like 5.2 million across the country, about 198,000 here in North Carolina. And I always point that out to professionals as a reminder that just because the incarceration is over doesn't necessarily mean the impacts are over. Just because my dad came home 2 weeks ago doesn't necessarily mean life's back to the way it was or that life is fine and dandy. It means my dad's home. And now we're dealing with the reentry piece. So consider the fact that impacts can continue well beyond the incarceration piece does. So just in terms of thinking about resources, my guess is all of you know Sesame Street. What you may or may not know is that a couple of years ago, Sesame Street launched a new Muppet and new materials, a new toolkit. His name is, the new Muppet's name is Alex, and he's that orange Muppet in the middle of your screen with that shock of blue hair, and his dad's in jail. And so they built the resources and the toolkit around that. It's available in English and Spanish. It's for kids 3 to 7, 3 to 8, and it's DVD or access to a DVD and printed materials for kids, caregivers, and parents. So this might be one of your homework assignments. Do you have any young children in your life that this might be helpful to them? Do you work with professionals, paid or volunteer, who might be interested? Is there a library that you're part of, whether one of our local libraries, a school library, a childcare provider library? Doesn't matter. Is this something that you think folks might find helpful? And I have copies. I'm happy to mail them off to people, either to their post office box or street address, home or work. So again, another resource for you if you think that might be interested. It's 3 to 7, 3 to 8. We've used it with older kids at Parent Day. And sometimes what you have to say is, I know they're Muppets, I know they're little and you're grown up, but so much of what Alex has to say, I think kids along an entire age spectrum would relate to what he has to say. And we've had older kids watch it. And I remember one little girl in particular just turned to her dad and said, I didn't know there were other kids with dads in prison. And this is a little girl who was at Parent Day with a whole bunch of other kids whose dads were in prison. So just a reminder that we need to keep letting kids know that they're not alone in this, that other kids are experiencing or have experienced what's happened. So I'm going to pause for just a second to make sure the chat box. So Chris, you're asking about the ages of the group of the kids. What are you thinking?
Well, I was wondering, when you were talking about children, what ages do they include in that? I think you just said something to 18.
Yeah, so Sesame Street is designed for kids 3 to 7 or 3 to 8. When we talk kids, we're talking birth to 18. Okay. With the reminder, though, that you don't stop being a kid when you're 18, right? Like all the research is showing in terms of brain development. And I also think about, kids not kids, right? Young adults who went off to college, right? Just not too long ago, 6 weeks or so ago, and what that would be like. So now you're 18, people assume you're grown, you're gone off to college, but now you're moving into your room and you've got other college students around you who are there with their parents, right? Parents are helping move in way too much stuff into their dorm room. And you look around and that's not your experience because your mom or dad is in jail or prison. Do you share that with your roommate? Do you hold off on telling them? So, we can talk birth to 18, but also as a reminder about what does it mean to be that older child and being lost in the conversation because people assume that you're grown up and this isn't an issue for you. But most of our conversations tend to be about kids who are still school age. So.
Yeah, Medicaid considers a child to be 21 and younger. Yeah. So that's why I asked that, because you do a child check on a 21-year-old always sounds kind of fishy.
Right.
Yeah.
And there is a Facebook kind of an informal support group that's the target audience is adult children who have an incarcerated parent. And they started because they said there's nothing out there. People assume that because we're adults, now I'm past the cutoff age, I'm 22, like I still want to have a relationship or have a difficult relationship with my incarcerated parent. I still love them. I can't see them. That doesn't necessarily go away when you reach that certain age cutoff. So I'm not going to spend any time talking about impacts for the most part. That's usually something we talk about when we're doing a workshop. But I want to share with you one of the slides that I do share with groups, because it's a relatively new slide. It's about a year old. And the link to the article there is at the bottom. Great article written by one of those young adults who grew up with her mom in prison. What I really like about this slide is I feel like it captures a lot of information in one place. When we talk about impacts, we talk about things like housing. What does it mean that your housing could become very tenuous if your parent is going off to jail or prison? That ties into financial hardship. That if that person was a breadwinner, primary, secondary, legal, not so legal, like that income's not there for your family anymore. So what does that mean? I think about the bottom where it's talking about changing caregivers. I think about changing relationships as a whole. So yes, as a child, that relationship with your parent is changing because they're going to jail or prison, but also relationships with who's caring for you, where your siblings are you together? Did you get separated? Will you come back together? So lots of changing relationships in addition to having that parent going to jail or prison. So again, check out that article if you're interested in hearing more, but I just think this is a great way to capture so many potential impacts. And then the other piece I want to share with you, we're going kind of flipping back to resources here, is I really like to think about making this as a universal conversation. So instead of guessing or thinking that we know which families are affected, provide materials, make them available to all families, and then families can decide when it's convenient, when it's going to work for them to access those resources. I always point out that, we're talking about parental incarceration, but it may very well be that it's not a parent who's gone to jail or prison. It may be an older sibling, a grandparent, an aunt and uncle, maybe someone who's been acting in a parental role, but isn't technically the parent. Well, that can still be a big deal for kids. If my older brother was the one caring for me or had a big influence in my life, and now he's gone to jail or prison, technically he's not my parent, but I'm still feeling many of the impacts in that previous slide, some of the same concerns. And so that's why I think, how do we make this universal, broaden the conversation, and then saying, how do we provide resources? And one of the things I always joke is that pretty much every list I create for a slide ends with other, because I don't want anyone to think this is an exhaustive list. This is a list I came up with, but undoubtedly there are other places that could be, or other things that could be added. So these are some of the places I think about, where could we be providing information about children of incarcerated parents in these particular settings? Some of it's pretty low tech, like if there's a waiting room, could we put some flyers out, or access to a book list? If kids are part of a backpack program, things like story time. Story time has been my pandemic kick now, is anytime I hear of a group reading a book as part of story time, whether doing it in person or virtual, is I'll say to them, would you consider reading a book about a child with an incarcerated parent? And if they come back and say, oh, I haven't thought about it, which most have, I'll say, would you think about it? And can we provide you some references? Here's a book list on our website to be able to do that. So we've had a couple that have done it, and one in particular, childcare center here in Durham, they've read two, and the director said, oh my gosh, the kids love it. Like they lap it up. They love the fact that somebody is telling a really good story. And I think for some kids, it's their story, which I think is pretty amazing, that kids get to hear a story about something that they're experiencing. So again, thinking about your time and work and connections in the community, are there some places here that you could connect to, or are there some other places that this just got you thinking about it, but they're not on the list? So to be thinking about that. And again, you can see it's a homework assignment. Where could this information be? Where should this information be? And then this is actually a screenshot of our website, our homepage. And what I did was I just dropped down a couple of boxes. So I mentioned book lists. So we just recently, in the last probably month or so, updated the book lists on our website. So there are 4 of them. I won't put a book on any of the lists unless I've read them, which doesn't mean they're all good books. It just means I've read all of them. But a place, again, a resource, share it with librarians. I always say, if you're at your library, check out the children's section. What's there? Are there any books there? Could books be added? For Durham County Library, there's a place that you can put in a request and say, we would like this book to be added to your collection. So thinking about that, but also other places where folks may have their own library. Again, it might be a waiting area, but there may be a library at a childcare center, in a faith community. A church may have a library, our school libraries. Or make the book list available for families. Maybe families are interested in looking at some books for themselves and for their kids to be able to read, or to read together. So again, it's another resource for families that we want to share with them. And then I mentioned earlier about See Us, Support Us. So timing is actually great for your meeting here today. Next month, Friday, actually, we'll launch the National See Us, Support Us campaign, which has been going on now. I think this is actually the 6th or maybe 8th year that's been going on. This See Us, Support Us happens throughout the year, but October is really the year where it goes national, and community partners from across the country are looking at creating these amazing resources. So their website is actually live right now. The focus is on educational well-being for kids from preschool on to college or beyond. We, as I mentioned, are in the process of putting together a youth panel for the end of October. So more details to follow on that. But really good resources on this site, and they will do a helpful tip each week throughout October. Really good information for educators with a pretty broad definition of educator. So it's, yeah, who's in the classroom, our teachers and our teacher assistants, but our school nurses, our counselors, our after-school providers. I mentioned about bus drivers and cafeteria staff and coaches. I've said we also need to broaden this to our libraries, like where is education happening outside our classrooms and our schools, to broaden that. So getting folks to think about, can they post some stuff on their website? Can they sign up for the mailing list? But this is CS Support Us. Again, another resource I would encourage you to check out when you have a chance, both now as it's going live, but then out throughout the month of October as well. Then the site will stay live after that. So it's not as though you're under pressure to do it by the 31st. You can actually look at it some point later on. So one of the things I do want to share, and Chris is actually new since even I talked with your group earlier in the summer. So about a month or so ago, we were actually awarded a grant from the Department of Public Safety, DPS, folks who run our prisons. And so we will be doing, it's a one-year grant with the possibility of 2 one-year extensions. It's 2 parts. So we will be doing training with staff at 13 of the prisons. 13 prisons in North Carolina are re-entry facilities. So they're the last stop. They're where people in theory go before they're released. So they're really thinking about the re-entry piece of this. So we will be doing training at those 13 facilities for staff around the importance of relationships with children, what children need, how to support those relationships, best practices. The second part of that is then we'll be hiring 3 staff to work in 5 of those individually with the incarcerated parents in the facilities and then with their families in the community to be lining up and making sure they're connected with resources about reestablishing the relationship, what support do families need, and then the whole reentry piece. So I'm excited and a little bit nervous. It's a big project, but we're excited that it's going to happen. And we're excited that the prisons are thinking about families, children, relationships, how that supports their work in terms of folks leaving and then not coming back. So that's what I have here for you today. I've thrown a lot at you. Hopefully you have some good homework assignments to work on. The good thing about the homework is that I don't need it back. So I don't need for you to turn your homework, because undoubtedly if you do, it means you're giving me something to do. And my list is pretty long. So I'm going to leave the homework for you to say, this is what you can do. If you want to share something, I would love to hear it right now or connect with me later. But I'm going to just pause for a second. It looks like there's a chat. So Rose, tell me a little bit more. Instability also leads to increased risk of sexual abuse. When you say instability, can you tell me what you mean by that?
You had a slide up that had a circle and arrows pointing to it about what happens, the risk to children who have incarcerated parents, and also the systemic things that can happen. So I would think that if you have had a parent in jail or have a parent in jail and they're unstable, that income is not coming in, and you might have to rely upon the kindness of your relatives or bounce around from couch to wherever. And that can open up a door for all types of abuse.
Yeah, I think anytime kids are in a situation where they're more vulnerable, right, and they don't necessarily have someone looking out for them, that they do, or they're at risk of lots of things, homelessness, abuse, whether it's sexual, emotional, physical, exploitation, I think in general. I think anytime kids, they talk about the importance of having one stable and secure adult in their life. If that was their incarcerated parent and that person's gone, then yeah, I think they're increased risk for a lot of really difficult situations. So I'm going to be, oh yeah, Rod.
Rod?
Do we have time for questions, Teresa? I don't know. Okay, great. Melissa, thank you for this presentation. It's been really informative and helpful. Thank you. I was just thinking, my daughter is in Wake County Public School System, and I wondered if you could share, do you know if Wake County has, any kind of focus and kind of resources available for kids in this regard? Or, if I were to reach out to, say, my daughter's, the librarian at my daughter's school, is this something she's going to be familiar with or not familiar with? I'm just kind of wondering what the situation is within Wake County Public Schools.
Yeah, so I would say if you have a connection with the librarian, definitely reach. That librarian may or may not be familiar. And I always feel like if they're familiar, then this is a good chance to reinforce. If they're not, a good chance to introduce. So we've had quite a few school staff members, librarians, not as many teachers, mostly student support services staff at various workshops. And we have presented all across the state. If you go to our map website, there's a map I call our Where's Waldo map. We've colored in. So we have had quite a few Wake County folks there. My guess is, if I had to guess, I would say probably not familiar, or maybe like in the back of the brain, oh, I think I heard something about that a while ago, but refresh my memory type thing. I'm going to guess. Wake County is such a big system, right, that we would have to probably be there every week to catch folks. But we have presented at the school social work conference. I'm actually presenting in a couple of weeks at the school librarian conference. So, any of those, we are trying to get ourselves in front of them to say, let's start thinking about this. So if there's something, if that's something you want to pursue and I can help you with it, let me know. Or if you pursue and have an update, let me know. But as I said at the top of the slide, like, let's continue the conversation. Let me know how I can help.
Got it. Thanks so much.
Yeah, and Melissa, I know that you deal with children all the time, but I bet, and I'm thinking of Mark Hall at this moment, who was incarcerated for 10 years.